Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue sur Irwin's French Class. Aujourd'hui, dans cette vidéo, nous allons voir toute la grammaire essentielle A1 et A2. Je m'appelle Irwin, je suis français et prof de français depuis plus de 15 ans ici en Australie à l'université. Dans cette vidéo, j'ai compilé pour vous tous les points essentiels de grammaire pour arriver au niveau A2. C'est parti.
Écoutez et répétez. Je, tu, il, elle, on, nous, vous, il, elle. Well done, guys. Okay, few things to note, right? So first, je is the E sound. Je. Tu is the U sound. So make sure you make a round with your lips, okay? And your tongue touches the back of your teeth. Tu, tu. Il, elle are pronounced the same way whether there's an S or not. Il, elle, elle. On is pronounced with your nose, okay? That's one of those nasal vowels, okay? On. And then there are quite a few consonants that are not pronounced, okay? Nous, you don't pronounce the S at the end. Vous, you don't pronounce the S at the end either. Nous, vous. And once again, il and il are pronounced the same. Elle and elle are pronounced the same. Let's review now the differences between the two languages, French and English. And first, as you can see, there are two possible forms for you, tu, and vous. I spoke extensively about that, about the difference between tu and vous in the first video of this series, the one about greetings and introducing yourself. But just to summarize very quickly, tu is used for interaction within an informal context. It's the one we use with family members or friends, for example. Papa, tu travailles aujourd'hui? Vous is used for interaction in formal context. For example, with an adult that you meet for the first time, or with someone to whom you need to show respect. For example, in France, kids would address their teacher using the vous form. Vous pourriez répéter, s'il vous plaît? And on the top of that, vous can also be used when addressing a group of people. For example, a teacher stepping in the classroom could say to their students, Bonjour, vous allez bien? Just like in English, in French we have one masculine and one feminine singular pronouns. Il, elle. And on is a pretty interesting one. It has the same conjugation as il and elle, and that's why in textbooks you will see these three pronouns always together like that. Il, elle, on. On can be the equivalent of nous in informal context. For example, if your mom calls you on the phone and she wants to know where you and your siblings are at, she could say, Allô, vous êtes où? And you could answer, On est à la maison. And on can also be the equivalent of one in English, or the people in general. Par exemple, en France, on parle français. So that sentence can be translated by, in France, one speaks French, or in France, people in general, people speak French. The last big difference is that there are two forms for they. Il, masculin pluriel, elle, féminin pluriel. And because there is a predominance of the masculine form in French, il is used for both male and mixed groups, and elle is used only for female group. So let's say there is a room full of 100 women and just one man, you will have to use il just because of that man. For example, let's say that your uncle's family is visiting and your mom is calling you again. So she could ask, Où sont ton oncle et ta tante? And you could answer, ils sont dans le jardin. Et tes cousines? Elles sont dans la maison. You see how we use il and elles in those contexts? So let's cover together the conjugation of être in the present tense. Here it is. Je suis, tu es, il est, elle est, on est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont, elles sont. Okay, so now listen carefully, focus on my mouth and repeat. Écoutez et répétez. Je suis, tu es, il est, elle est, on est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont, elles sont. Très bien, excellent. All right, let's keep the chart for a sec, because there's a few things to note regarding pronunciation. As you may have noticed, there's a few consonants that are not pronounced, and usually S and T at the end of words are not pronounced in French. So let's review the form one by one. Je suis. Here the difficulty is to switch from the U sound to the E sound, from a round shape of your lips to a full stretch. Let's do it. Oui, oui, je suis. Très bien. For tu, il, elle, and on, the pronunciation of the verb is the same. It may be written differently, but it's pronounced the same. Like est, simply est. Tu es. And for il, elle, and on, don't forget to link the subject pronoun and the verb together. Okay? On répète. Il est, elle est, on est. So once again, tu, il, elle, on are pronounced the same. Et. Nous sommes. So here it's not an closed O, like O, but an open one. A. On répète. Nous sommes. Nous sommes. Vous êtes. Here, be careful with the liaison, okay? Between the subject pronoun and the verb. Vous êtes. Vous êtes with a the sound. Ils, elles, sont. It's a nasal vowel that you need to do. Sont. Sont. Ils sont. Elles sont. And please note that we are not pronouncing the T here, okay? Ils sont. Elles sont. Here is the conjugation chart of avoir in the present tense. So let's work on our pronunciation. Please repeat after me. J'ai. Tu as. Il a. Elle a. On a. Nous avons. Vous avez. Ils ont. Elles ont. That's very good, guys. Okay, some remarks on pronunciation now. Let's start with the first three singular forms. Je, tu, il, elle, and on. Okay? The first one, j'ai. You see the elision there? So the sounds are together, right? J'ai. That's good. Tu as, il a, elle a, on a. I know they are spelled differently, a and a, with an S and without, but the pronunciation is the same, okay? And with il a, you see, you need to do the liaison, elle a, on a. Same goes for the next three plural forms, okay? It's important that you do the liaison for them. Nous avons with the the sound, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont, elles ont. That's good. So let's review the use of avoir in context. Avoir is used in French to talk about one's age, and it's not to be like in English that we use in French, but avoir, to have. The structure is always avoir plus the number, le nombre, plus un. So for example, j'ai 42 ans. Il a 28 ans. Elle a 34 ans. So here literally it means, for example, j'ai 42 ans, I have 42 years. So to the regular conjugation of avoir that we just learned, simply add the number of your age followed by en. And don't pronounce the S of this word, okay? Just en, that's the nasal sound. And do a liaison in between the number and en. So, 1 an, 2 ans, 3 ans, 4 ans, 5 ans, 6 ans, 7 ans, 8 ans, and be careful, that one is tricky, 9 ans. Yes, that's a V sound that we use for liaison here. In French, there are 3 groups of verbs in total. The first one represents the largest, by far, group of regular verbs. They are identifiable by their infinitives ending in ER, such as parler or aimer. The infinitive is the non-conjugated form of the verb. For example, travailler, which means to work, or étudier, which is to study. But as soon as we add a subject to it, for example, I study, the verb becomes conjugated. So most French verbs ending in ER that you may already know, and that we used in previous videos, except for aller, which is an exception, okay, aller, to go. They are all conjugated in the present tense by dropping the ER to form the stem, which is called the radical in French. And to that stem, you will need to add specific endings corresponding to the subject. So let's take, for example, the verb parler, which means to talk. The first step consists of dropping ER to find out the radical, or stem in English. For parler, this is parle. And believe me or not, but this is the hardest part of the process. All you need to do from there is adding the corresponding ending of the subject. By the way, if this concept of subject is still a bit unclear to you, I suggest you watching or rewatching my video covering the subject pronouns. So here are the endings. Simply add them to the stem of the verb and you obtain its conjugation in the present tense. So let's cover the conjugation of parler together. Écoutez, focus on my mouth, and répéter. Je parle, tu parles, il parle, elle parle, on parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle, elle parle. Very good. So this is the conjugation pattern of parler in the present tense. But what is the present tense? In English, it can be expressed in 3 different ways, which all correspond to a single verb in French. For example, je travaille can be translated as I work, I am working, or I do work. Nous étudions can be translated as we study, we are studying, or we do study. And here are some regular, super useful ER verbs that you may already know or may need to learn. Aimer, chanter, danser, dîner, écouter, étudier, fermer, inviter, habiter, jouer, regarder, travailler, visiter. And all of those are regular, they will follow the same pattern as we just did for parler. Now let's consider the verb habiter, which means to live, is the one you use when you say I live in Marseille, for example. J'habite à Marseille. Okay? So let's follow the same pattern and conjugate it at the present tense. So here's the stem, habite. Remember, you need to drop ER at the end. So that's the very first step. Habite, to which we are going to add the endings. The process is strictly the same, but be careful with verbs starting with either a vowel or an H, like habite. Add the je form look at the je form here. You will need to drop the e and add an apostrophe. This is called an elision. Une elision. Okay? This is a very recurring phonetic phenomenon in French. Instead of saying je habite, the pronunciation is east as j'habite. Same will go for j'aime, j'étudie, for these two verbs that start with vowels, okay, A and E. J'aime, j'étudie. Please note that for those verbs, a liaison must be made for nous, vous, il, and elles plural forms. If the concept of liaison is a bit unclear to you, I send you back to the video on the French sounds, okay, where we covered it. So basically there will be a the sound between the last consonant of the nous, vous, il, elles forms and the start of the verb, okay? Nous aimons, you hear the the sound, nous aimons. Vous habitez, same with verb starting with an H, okay, same principle. Ils écoutent, elles étudient. In French, the negation is formed by wrapping around the verb ne pas. For example, and by the way, you can repeat them after me. Je ne suis pas français. Je ne suis pas français. I am not French. Nous ne travaillons pas. We are not working. We don't work. Tu ne regardes pas la télévision. You are not watching TV. Many French verbs start with a vowel or an H. For this verb, and due to phonetics reasons, ne becomes an apostrophe. And again, this is the elision that we talked about in previous videos. Okay? So for example, je ne ai pas sounds quite awkward, whereas dropping the e and linking ne sound with the verb like in je n'ai pas sounds much smoother. More examples here, and repeat them after me. Je n'habite pas en France. Il n'étudie pas les mathématiques. Tu n'aimes pas le fromage. How is that possible? French has several other types of negation where other words make the negation in replacement of pas. For example, and let's repeat this together, ne jamais for never, ne rien for nothing or anything, ne personne, nobody or anybody. So let's start with ne plus verb plus jamais. Jamais means never and replaces the word pas. For example, and let's repeat this, les étudiants écoutent, that's positive. Les étudiants n'écoutent jamais, they never listen. Elles voyagent, elles ne voyagent jamais, they never travel. Nous cuisinons, nous ne cuisinons jamais, we never cook, and that's negative. Now let's cover ne plus verb plus rien. The word rien translates to both nothing and anything, and also replaces pas in the negation structure. So, je ne sais rien can be translated as I don't know anything or I know nothing. For examples, and let's repeat these. Nous ne visitons rien à Paris. We don't visit anything in Paris. Tu ne manges rien au restaurant ce soir. Il ne donne rien aux autres. He doesn't give anything to others. Finally, let's do ne, verb, and personne. Within the negation form, personne means nobody or anybody. For example, tu n'aimes personne. You don't like anybody. Ils n'écoutent personne. They don't listen to anyone or anybody. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can figure out the gender of most nouns in French just by looking at their endings. Please note that the list is non-exhaustive, and for every ending, exceptions can be found, of course. This is where the beauty of the language resides. I try to compile usual and easy to remember nouns. So let's try with the endings that are typically feminine. The first ending is E accent aigu, E. And by the way, why don't you try to repeat these nouns after me? Alright, let's do it. Fusée, fumée, idée. But be careful with this because there are two very common nouns that are actually masculine ending in E accent aigu, E. Musée is masculine and lycée is also masculine. The TE ending, like in faute, flûte, carte, boîte. The TE accent aigu, okay, with an accent on the top this time. Masculinité is feminine, yes. So it's because of its ending. You see how the ending is actually the most important part, alright? Masculinité is feminine. Féminité is feminine. What about virilité? Yes, that also ends with T, E accent aigu. Therefore, it's feminine. Intégrité, liberté. The E, de T, E ending. Like raquette, silhouette, vedette, crevette, canette, recette, casquette. Now we have the E accent grave, TE, and E accent circonflexe, TE, like in planète, comète, tête, requête, bête, fête. The E, I, E ending is also feminine. Abeille, corbeille. In the same vein, you have the AI, E ending, like in médaille, volaille. The IE, ending is also feminine, like in boulangerie, fromagerie. The ION ending is also feminine, like in télévision, information, impression, compréhension. Now let's do some of the masculine endings. And we're going to start with ET and AIT endings because these two are pronounced the same way, like E. So the ET ending, like in bouquet, secret, robinet, and the AIT ending, like in les, portrait, souhait, extrait, are typically masculine. Next is the EAU ending, and that one is pronounced as O, like in château, gâteau, cadeau, bateau, manteau, with the exception of eau, which is water in French. Eau is feminine. The EIL ending, like in soleil, conseil, sommeil, orteil, is typically masculine. Same goes for the age ending, the AGE ending, like in voyage, garage, personnage, fromage. And this one has a few exceptions actually, like nage, plage, cage, quite a few. The AIL ending is also typically masculine, like in travail, that is very common. The ISM ending, be careful with the pronunciation of this one, the ISM ending, ISME, like in journalisme, is masculine. And the ABLE ending, ABLE, like in portable, câble, sable, with the exception of table, that is actually feminine. Gender in French can also be guessed by identifying categories of nouns that are typically feminine or masculine. And this is mostly due to the noun that is used for the category itself. Like for example, cheese, fromage is masculine. All the nouns related to cheese, camembert, comté, brands and kind of cheese are usually masculine. Same goes for days and month. They are also masculine. Lundi, mars, avril, etc. Trees, nouns of trees are also masculine typically because arbre is masculine. Chêne, pommier, cerisier, etc. Be careful with languages. They are all masculine. Français, anglais, espagnol. But the word, the noun, langue is actually feminine. So this is kind of confusing, but please remember that all the languages of the world are masculine. Now let's go through the categories of feminine nouns. Voiture et moto, cars and bicycles and motorbikes are typically feminine because voiture and moto are feminine nouns. So when you use a brand like Renault, Nissan, whatever, these are going to be used in a feminine form in French. Nouns of science, of sciences, are also typically feminine. First you get the IE ending, that is feminine. Biologie, chimie, etc. But you also have linguistique, mathématiques, all of these are feminine. Gender is rarely meaningful. Limited nouns change meaning depending on their gender. They are called épicènes. For example, and you've got the translations in brackets. Un hymne, une hymne. Un livre, une livre. Un manche, une manche. Un moule, une moule. Un mémoire, une mémoire. Un poste, une poste. Un tour, une tour. Un voile, une voile. Here are the indefinite articles in French. Un before masculine and singular nouns, for example, un chat. Une before feminine and singular nouns, for example, une maison. Des is used before plural nouns, for example, des chats, des maisons. So let's repeat them for pronunciation. Un, une, des. That's good. Okay, how to use them in context now. Use the indefinite articles when talk about one or several individual things that you can count as opposed to an entire category of things. This can be to identify something or someone. In this case, use un or une along with c'est, which means it is. For example, c'est un chat. C'est une maison. And please note the liaison between c'est and the indefinite article. C'est un chat. C'est une maison. Let's try to repeat this. C'est un journaliste ou c'est une journaliste. For professional people, the gender is obviously at play. So un for masculine, une for feminine. C'est becomes ce sont. For example, ce sont des chats, ce sont des maisons. And please note that, just like in English, add an S to nouns when plural, and that S is never pronounced in French. Also use indefinite articles to say what there is in a given place. For example, il y a un étudiant dans la classe. Il y a des arbres dans le parc. Il y a une bibliothèque sur le campus. Okay, let's do a short phonetic break here with these examples. Please note that you must do liaison when nouns start with vowels for both singular and plural forms. Un étudiant, there is a liaison here. Des arbres with the Z sound. You can also use indefinite articles before an expression of quantity, like une part de, une tranche de, un peu de, des verres de. For example, je mange une part de gâteau avec un peu de café. When used in negative sentences, all these articles turn into de. Here are some examples. Il y a un stade, il n'y a pas de stade. You need to use de because the sentence is negative. Il y a une université, il n'y a pas d'université. And here don't forget the elision as université starts with a vowel. You have to drop the E and add an apostrophe for phonetic reasons. Il n'y a pas d'université. Je mange une part de gâteau. Je ne mange pas de part de gâteau. Il y a des étudiants dans la classe. Il n'y a pas d'étudiants dans la classe. As there are always exceptions in French, don't use de when the negative verb is être, to be. Just use the indefinite article as if the sentence was positive. So the article doesn't change with c'est or ce sont. For example, c'est une étudiante. Ce n'est pas une étudiante. You see, whether positive or negative, you keep the same indefinite article because here the verb that is used is être, to be. Ce sont des amis d'enfance, ce ne sont pas des amis d'enfance. There are three singular forms. Le before masculine nouns, la before feminine nouns, elle apostrophe before nouns starting with a vowel or an H, and there is only one plural form, les. Okay, let's repeat those. Le, la, elle apostrophe, les. French definite articles are used similarly as their English equivalent, the, to talk about specific identified nouns. For example, le livre de français est sur la table. You have the translation in brackets. La voiture est neuve. Je parle avec la directrice. However, there are several instances where a definite article is required in French, but not in English. In the general sense, for example, le sport est nécessaire pour être en bonne santé. Sport is necessary to be in good shape. J'aime le café, mais pas le thé. I love coffee or I like coffee, but not tea. With multiple nouns, il met les assiettes et les verres dans le placard. He puts the plates and glasses in the cupboard. Le cahier et le stylo sont sur le bureau. The notebook and pen are on the table. For subject and concept also. La liberté est essentielle dans la démocratie. Freedom is essential in democracy. J'étudie le français. I study French. No definite articles in English. Countries and regions. La France est un beau pays. France is a beautiful country. Je visite le Brésil et la Bolivie. I visit Brazil and Bolivia. You see, here we don't need definite articles in English, but we do in French. Possession and ownership. Le chien de mon ami s'appelle Rufus. My friend's dog's name is Rufus. You see, no definite articles in English. Days. Je travaille le lundi et le mardi. You see, le in front of each day here. I work on Monday and Tuesday, but there's nothing in English. The easiest way to ask a close question is by raising your intonation. By doing so, you can turn any statement into a question. For instance, with the statement Tu es étudiante. That can become a question. Tu es étudiante? So you can raise your intonation on the very last syllable or gradually. It doesn't really matter. Tu es étudiante? Tu es étudiante? This is surely the most powerful way of asking a yes or no question, as you can even do that with just a single word. So this is super useful for beginners, or if you find yourself in a French-speaking country with limited French. For example, in a restaurant, you can ask for the menu. Menu or le menu, of course, if you know the definite article with it. If you are looking for the metro, for example, métro or le métro. So even without asking properly the question, where is the metro? Où est le métro? People will understand you and hopefully help you out. The second way is to place est que at the start of the question before the subject and the verb. For example, and you can repeat this after me, est-ce que vous êtes français? Est-ce que tu parles japonais? Est-ce que nous allons au cinéma ce soir? that interrogative expression is quite specific to French and may sound a bit strange for English speakers especially. So don't try to translate it, it wouldn't make much sense. Est-ce que tu es français? Is it that you're French? So just remember that this expression is very commonly used in everyday French conversation and is colloquial, so mostly used in spoken French. By using est-ce que, the intonation is not relevant anymore, as est-ce que is used only in questions. So therefore you can ask an est-ce que question with a flat intonation if you wish. Est-ce que tu fais du sport? But you can also raise your intonation just like we did before. Est-ce que tu fais du sport? And please also note that est-ce que becomes est-ce with the apostrophe before a vowel. Est-ce qu'il est sympa? Est-ce qu'elles ont un projet intéressant? Est-ce qu'Eric fait du français? The third way is a bit more complex. So imagine if you are presuming that someone will probably answer yes. You can either use n'est-ce pas or non at the end of a question with rising intonation. So n'est-ce pas is the equivalent to the English tag question. For example, il fait beau, n'est-ce pas? The weather is nice, isn't it? Ils vont à la plage, n'est-ce pas? They are going to the beach, aren't they? Elle fait du foot, n'est-ce pas? She plays football, doesn't she? And non has exactly the same function, but is rather more informal. And it's the equivalent of right in English. Il fait froid, non? It's cold, right? Il a 20 ans aujourd'hui, non? He's turning 20 today, right? To answer a yes or no question, you can obviously just use oui ou non, or give a more elaborate answer. For example, est-ce que tu fais du sport? Oui, je fais du sport. Non, je ne fais pas de sport. And please check out my video on negation in French if you need to brush up a little bit on that. Another example, il ne travaille pas le vendredi? Non, il ne travaille pas le vendredi. Informally, you can just reply with sounds pretty much. So positively, you can go like, il fait chaud, non? Uh-huh. Or negatively, il fait chaud, non? Uh-uh. Quel is an interrogative adjective. It means which or what in English, and is mostly used in questions. As it is an adjective, it needs to agree in gender and number with the noun it refers to. Therefore, as all French adjectives, there are 4 forms of quel, and here they are. Check them out, because now I need your full attention for the pronunciation, as it is going to get tricky. You are with me? So let's do the pronunciation together. You can repeat after me. Quel, quel, quel. Watch out for the last one. Quel. Sorry, I just love doing this. It works every time in class. So quel is going to be quite easy for you guys to use because the 4 forms of quel are pronounced the same way. Okay, just quel. And here are some useful questions you can ask someone using quel. So if you want to ask for someone's last name, pour demander le nom, which is masculine as you can see in French. So you are going to use that quel. And you can repeat the question after me. Quel est votre nom? Quel est votre nom? Also note that you rather use the formal form with votre in this question, as it is usually asked in formal context. So for the first name now, le prénom in French, which is also masculine, the informal form is obviously also being used. Okay, so let's cover it together. The question is right here. Let's repeat it. Quel est ton prénom? Let's repeat. Quel est ton prénom? To ask for someone's phone number, le numéro de téléphone, which is masculine in French, you can ask this question, and let's repeat it together. Quel est ton numéro de téléphone? Let's do it one more time. Quel est ton numéro de téléphone? To ask for someone's age now. L'âge, which is also masculine in French. Two possibilities as you can see. The first one is, let's repeat it. Quel est ton âge? And the second one, tu as quel âge? So you see that the two questions are very similar but not completely identical, right? So in its structure, quel can be directly followed by either a noun, like is the case in the second question. Tu as quel âge? You see quel and âge. Âge is the noun. Tu as quel âge? Or it can also be followed by the verb être and a noun, like it is the case in the questions that we have covered so far, that have the same structure as the first question over here. Quel est ton âge? You remember the other ones? Quel est ton numéro de téléphone? Quel est ton nom? Quel est ton prénom? Quel est ton âge? So quel plus être plus the noun. So to ask now for someone's date of birth, which is la date de naissance in French, that is feminine. So the form of quel you're going to use won't be the same as previously. The one you're going to use now is quel, Q-U-E, deux L-E, that's right. And the question is for the date of birth, you've got two options that I've put here. So the first one is the informal version and the second one is the formal version. So let's do the first one. Quelle est ta date de naissance? Let's repeat it one more time. Quelle est ta date de naissance? That's right. And the second one is quelle est votre date de naissance? Let's repeat it. Quelle est votre date de naissance? So now to ask for someone's email address. Adresse is also feminine. The question is here, and let's repeat it together. Quelle est ton adresse mail? Quelle est ton adresse mail? The formal version. Quelle est votre adresse mail? Ask someone's nationality. Nationality is also feminine. The questions are here. Let's do it first for the informal and second for the formal. Quelle est ta nationalité? Quelle est ta nationalité? Formal one now. Quelle est votre nationalité? To ask someone's favorite color, why not? So color is couleur, and that's also feminine. All right. So the two questions are here. Let's repeat them. Quelle est ta couleur préférée? Quelle est votre couleur préférée? Okay, let's do some plural nouns now. To ask for someone's subject, they study. So matière is the word you want to use in French, and we're going to use it in the plural form. All right, so feminine and plural. So watch out the form of quel you want to use. It's going to be quel, feminine and plural with the S at the end. Yeah, and the question is right here. Quelle matière est-ce que tu étudies? Let's do it one more time. Let's repeat. Quelle matière est-ce que tu étudies? Same structure for the languages that someone speaks. Langue is also feminine, right? And you can use it in the plural form, like here in this question. So let's repeat it. Quelle langue est-ce que tu parles? Quelle langue est-ce que tu parles? So as you can see in these two questions, you can combine quelle and a noun, quelle langue, quelle matière, and est-ce que that we covered in the previous video, right? So similarly, to ask on what days someone works, you can ask that question, and days is jour, that is masculine. So be careful with the form of quel you're going to use. The question is right here, same structure as previously. Let's repeat it. Quel jour est-ce que tu travailles? One more time. Quel jour est-ce que tu travailles? Before anything new, let's start with some revision of the conjugation chart of the verb venir in the present tense, because it is essential that you get it right in order to properly form the recent past in French. So here it is. For pronunciation, please repeat after me. Let's do it. Je viens, tu viens, il vient, elle vient, on vient, nous venons, vous venez, ils viennent, elles viennent. To use the recent past, in French is le passé récent, You need to use venir conjugated at the right form, followed by the preposition de and the infinitive of the action verb. For example, and you can repeat this after me, je viens de regarder un film. I just watched a movie. Ils viennent de partir. They just left. Elle vient d'arriver. She just arrived. So please note that for that last example, you need to do an elision, okay? De turns into de apostrophe because arriver starts with a vowel, okay? Be careful with that. As you can see in every example, the verb venir is conjugated and the infinitive is used right after the preposition de. And that structure is always the same. So it makes it a very easy tense to use if, of course, you get right the conjugation of venir. That's why it's really important that you learn that one by heart. In French and in English, there are two future tenses. In both languages, there is the simple future. It's called le futur simple in French. For example, in English, it's I will do this, I will go there. We will cover it later on in this series. And there is the near future. In English is, for example, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go there, which posits a time a little earlier than the simple future. To form the near future, you need to combine the present of the verb aller, which means to go in English, with the infinitive of the action verb. In this regard, the structure of the French near future is very similar to the one in English. Before we go further into the construction of the tense, let's do some revision of the conjugation of aller in the present tense. Here it is. Let's cover it together, so please repeat after me for pronunciation. Je vais, tu vas, il va, elle va, on va, nous allons, don't forget the liaison over here, let's do it again. Nous allons, same for vous, vous allez, ils vont, elles vont. So now all you need to do to make the near future is adding the infinitive of the action verb to these forms. For example, and you can repeat them after me, je vais étudier, for I'm going to study. Tu vas jouer au foot. Il va arriver. Elle va écouter de la musique. Nous allons partir bientôt. Vous allez voir un film. Ils vont manger. To negate the near future, all you need to do is place ne pas around aller. For example, je vais étudier becomes je ne vais pas étudier. And you can repeat that after me. Je ne vais pas étudier. Tu vas jouer au foot becomes tu ne vas pas jouer au foot. Il va arriver becomes il ne va pas arriver. The way the near future is used in French is very close to the way it is used in English. As I said at the start of this video, it is to talk about something that is going to happen soon in the near future. Therefore, it is quite normal to find expressions of time such as ce soir, demain, tout à l'heure, bientôt. For example, and let's repeat this together. Ce soir, nous allons manger au restaurant. Let's do it, that first bit. Et demain, nous allons voir un film au cinéma. However, the proximity in time is relative to the action that is expressed. In the previous example, I could use the near future because of the expression ce soir and demain, but also because eating at the restaurant can be considered as something that one does somewhat regularly. If I talk about the same action, eating at the restaurant, but now in 2 years' time, I will then have to use the simple future. Conversely, if now the action is, for example, to go to France, if you live in another country, this is something that one does arguably less often than eating at the restaurant. Therefore, if it is happening in 2 years, it could still be considered close in the future given the nature of the action. Therefore, you could say, dans 2 ans, in 2 years, dans 2 ans, je vais aller en France, and use the near future for that. By the way, as you see in this example, this is the verb aller that we conjugated in the near future. And this is a confusion that I have seen in many of my students. The use of aller in the near future because of the repetition of the verb. Yes, aller is used both in the structure of the near future, the first aller, je vais, and secondly as the action verb, simply the infinitive aller. So there's a repetition here. However, it is perfectly regular. Just like in English, when you want to say I'm going to go to the park, en français, you're going to say je vais aller au parc. And it's probably even more confusing if you use the vous form, as you then need to repeat the same sound, okay? Vous allez aller au parc. You see how we repeat aller? Yeah, it could be a bit confusing, so be careful with that. Let's repeat it together. Vous allez aller au parc. In French, just like in English, to obtain specific information, we begin our questions with an interrogative expression, such as in English, when, where, why. In French, où, quand, pourquoi, comment. These interrogative expressions indicate the type of information you are looking for. Here are 3 questions and their possible answers. Please repeat them after me and focus on their structure. This is very important to be able to identify structure, recurrences, okay? That's what we are looking for. So let's repeat them together and focus on the structure. Où est-ce que tu habites? J'habite à Marseille. Quand est-ce que tu viens? Je viens vers 11 heures. Pourquoi est-ce que tu étudies le français? Parce que j'aime la culture française. So now tell me, where are the interrogative expressions located in the questions? At the start, that's right. And now, what comes after these expressions? Est-ce que, that's right. Do you remember est-ce que? This very specific French expression found in questions? We covered it in our previous video, the yes or no questions, and the link is up here, you know, if you want to check it out. Then after est-ce que, what is there? There is a subject and a verb. So the structure that we are going to use is interrogative expression first, then est-ce que, then subject, then verb. In casual conversation, the interrogative expression can be sent at the end of the question. By doing so, est-ce que is no longer required, but the intonation becomes a little bit more relevant. You can still go with tu habites où, a very flat intonation, but it's better with intonation up, right? Tu habites où? Let's repeat that one. Tu habites où? Tu viens quand? The most formal version of these questions will be formed by inversion between the subject and the verb. And once again, if you do that, you need to drop est-ce que. But the interrogative expression has to be at the start. So here are the formal versions. Let's repeat this together. Où habites-tu? Quand viens-tu? And just note that these are more used in writing than in speaking. Therefore, there are 3 different versions of the same question, 3 different levels of formality. Casual or colloquial, with the interrogative expression at the end. Let's repeat that. Tu habites où? The standard version with est-ce que, où est-ce que tu habites? And finally, the formal version, où habites-tu? Okay, let's repeat the 3 different versions together. Tu habites où? Où est-ce que tu habites? Où habites-tu? Here are some interrogative expressions that you can also use with the same structure. À quelle heure is the first one. At what time? And let's repeat the example together. À quelle heure est-ce que tu travailles? Comment is another one. Comment is for how. Let's repeat the question together. Comment est-ce que tu vas à l'université? And please note that pourquoi, which is the last one we're going to review, pourquoi always comes along with parce que in the answer. Okay? Why? Because. Pourquoi? Let's repeat that. Parce que. So the question is, pourquoi est-ce que tu apprends le français? And let's repeat that together. Parce que je veux visiter la France. To ask about people in French, we use the interrogative pronoun qui, which means who in English, but also whom when it's attached to a preposition like in French à, de, avec, pour. So it will become à qui, de qui, avec qui, pour qui. And the construction of the question is the same as we covered in our previous video that you can rewatch through the link above. So as a reminder, the structure of the interrogation was interrogative expression plus est-ce que plus subject plus verb. For example, following that structure and qui in the questions or qui along with a preposition. So let's cover them together and please repeat after me. Qui est-ce que vous invitez ce soir? À qui est-ce que tu téléphones? De qui est-ce qu'il parle? Avec qui est-ce que nous jouons au foot? Pour qui est-ce qu'elle travaille? And your answer to those questions should then contain people or also entities like a company name for the last question. Whatever is the answer, you must reuse the preposition that you used in the question. For example, à qui est-ce que tu téléphones? Je téléphone à ma mère. And here you need to use à because you've been using à in the question. À qui? À qui est-ce que tu téléphones? Je téléphone à ma mère. Next example. De qui est-ce qu'il parle? Il parle de son collègue. Avec qui est-ce que nous jouons au foot? Nous jouons au foot avec, yes, avec nos voisins. Pour qui est-ce qu'elle travaille? Elle travaille pour Greenpeace, for example. To ask who's doing something, you can either drop est-ce que, like for example, qui téléphone? You can totally say that. Or modify slightly est-ce que and turn it into a more personal expression. Est-ce qui? So the question will become qui est-ce qui téléphone? So it's not the most beautiful way to say that due to the repetition of qui est-ce qui, you know, so it's not the most beautiful way, but it's very much used. To ask about things, use que with est-ce que. So, and be careful with the elision. So it will become qu'est-ce que? For example, the question for what are you doing? Qu'est-ce que tu fais? The answer could be je regarde la télé. Use quoi. Que turns into quoi with the prepositions that we covered earlier. So for example, and let's repeat this together. À quoi est-ce que tu penses? De quoi est-ce que vous parlez? Avec quoi est-ce que tu pars en camping? And please note that quoi can also be used alone, like just quoi? What do you think it means? What? Quoi? Exactly.
Voilà les amis, c'est tout pour cette vidéo. Si vous l'avez aimé, n'oubliez pas de mettre un pouce bleu et de vous abonner pour soutenir ma chaîne. Au revoir, à plus. Ciao.